Good afternoon. My name is Zach Kennedy, and I'm an Extension Specialist in Community and Economic Development with the U of I Extension. Thank you all for taking the time to participate in this webinar that's offered through University of Illinois Extension's local government education program. To ensure the best possible quality in our recording, microphones will be muted during the presentation. However, we do encourage you to add questions to the chat space. If you have any problems connecting, you can add those into the chat space as well. I'll view your comments and questions and will be able to respond or pose the questions to our presenters. Today's webinar, Investing in Building Energy Savings, is part of our spring series on infrastructure for economic development. As I mentioned, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our local government education website as well as on our YouTube channel. We have two great presenters lined up today. They're both from the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center, which is also known as CDAC. Robert Nemeth is the technical director for CDAC. Robert is a licensed architect in the state of Illinois and has been involved with building design, energy analysis, and construction since 1975. At CDAC, Robert has participated in site visits, determining energy saving strategies and estimating energy savings potential, writing reports, providing technical support to colleagues, conducting water saving audits, writing newsletter articles, and more. And then joining us also is his colleague Todd Rusk. And Todd Rusk is the Director of Operations at CDAC, where he manages the day-to-day operations. And for over 15 years, Todd has served in various roles related to technical assistance, technology development, and applied research at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In these roles, he developed expertise in sustainability for buildings and manufacturing processes, specifically the reduction of energy, water, waste, and chemicals. And this is done in diverse settings ranging from public sector building types, water and wastewater treatment facilities, heavy and light manufacturing, multifamily residential, and commercial office buildings. In his current role at CDAC, Todd works extensively with public sector facilities, helping these facilities to identify and implement energy cost savings. So without further ado, at this time, I will turn it over to Robert.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Zach said, my name is Robert Nemeth. I'm the technical director here at the University at CDAC. Today we're going to focus on county and municipal facilities, and I'm going to talk about basically what we do, and then Todd's going to talk about financing for projects. So CDAC is a part of Illinois Energy Now, as is the Energy Resource Center up at the UIC. They take care of this is really a team effort for Illinois Energy Now. The ERC up at University of Illinois Chicago takes care of boilers and combined heat and power plants and some other things. MEA, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, they take care of the STEP program, which provides free products such as LED exit lights and occupancy sensors and low flow shower heads and things like that to our clients. And then there's CDAC, and we have two offices. We down here at the University of Illinois are located here at the university, and then we have a private partner that is located up in Chicago, 360 Energy Group, and both of us are considered CDAC. So it's a fairly large team of players here. The Smart Energy Design Assistance Center, it's a public-private partnership. We all work for basically the Department of Commerce. They organize and run the whole show. We're located down here, as I mentioned, at the U of I. 360 Energy Group's up in Chicago, and then UIC Energy Resource Center is up in Chicago at the university there. We do a lot of outreach and training, such as this. We do our primary goals or efforts focus on energy assistance and assessments, where we're helping people identify what to do in their buildings to make them more energy efficient. We also have a new construction design assistance program where we review new designs and help architects and mechanical engineers try to make their new buildings as energy efficient as possible. We also have an incentive, new construction incentives, which where we're providing incentives for people to go beyond code. And then we do a few other things. Our partners up at 360 Energy Group takes care of the retro commissioning. And we also help people fill out their applications for incentives. So DCEO runs the show. They get their money from ComEd and Ameren, Illinois on the electric side. Let me skip ahead one slide real quick here. On your utility bills, you pay a small rider down here in Ameren. It's called the EDR charge, Energy and Demand Reduction Charge. Everybody pays this, and that goes into a pool of money, and it's the same thing. It might be called something different on ComEd, but it's this really small rider on your electric bill, and that money goes to ComEd and Ameren, Illinois, collect that money. They keep 75% of that, and 25% of that goes to DCEO. The same thing on the gas side, Nicor Gas, Peoples North Shore, and Ameren. That 25% of the funds that they collect goes to DCEO, and then that money gets sent to us. We take care of the public sector, which is government type buildings. So we look at a lot of schools, community type buildings, colleges, and public universities. Part of that money also goes to low-income residential program, which is down the hall from us, public housing authorities and stuff like that. So the ComEd and Ameren, Illinois take care of the public sector, and we take care of the they take care of the private sector. We take care of the public sector. So there's all kinds of incentives out there for improving your building operations. So there's lighting incentives, changing your T12 lamps to T8 lamps, T8 lamps to reduced wattage T8 lamps, lighting controls. You can find a lot of this information on our website, cdac.org. And this is really just a summary of some of the incentives out there. It's really a quite extensive list of incentives, and you can go to the Illinois Energy Now website and download the incentive application, which delineates all these incentives that are available. So these last ones, these were the electric incentives, and then there's also natural gas incentives for furnaces, for high efficiency furnaces, boiler improvements, steam boilers, all kinds of kitchen equipment improvements that you can get incentives for. And then these are the prescriptive incentives. For example, if you're putting in an infrared charbroiler, $1,750 per unit. There are also custom incentives on both the gas side and on the electric side, which here you have to show calculations for your energy savings, and in this instance it's $2.50 per therm. If you're saving over 50,000 therms, it's $3.50 per therm, and if you're doing something that saves a lot of gas, over 100,000 therms, you get $4.50 per therm incentive. So this is just a map. It shows we have touched almost every area in the state. CDAC's been in existence since I think about 2003 or 4. So we have touched a lot of facilities around the state. So what would interest the folks on today's webinar are probably city and office buildings, courthouses, police and fire stations, water supply and wastewater treatment plants, detention facilities, recreation facilities, public works, vehicle maintenance sheds, and a lot of other types of buildings that you probably oversee or would fall under municipal facilities or county facilities. So the goals for our clients is to save energy dollars, identify efficient equipment upgrades, identify what kind of incentives are available for your upgrades, and to reduce your carbon footprint. And the nice thing is, a lot of times the energy saving, we're helping you try to save energy dollars, but those improvements oftentimes also help improve the comfort of your buildings, and that's an unquantifiable improvement to your facility. So it's not just the energy dollars that we're trying to save, we're trying to help you improve the comfort of your buildings also. There's different types of levels of analysis that we do. ASHRAE, the American Society for Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, they've got 3 different levels of audits that are conducted. One's the basic walkthrough audit, and that preliminary audit. That's what CDAC does, and we also do the level 2, where we get kind of more in-depth analysis of how a facility uses energy and things of that nature. The level 3 is a very detailed audit, and that's sort of beyond the scope of what we do. We also provide portfolio analysis. This is if a client comes to us and says, I've got, for example, 8 schools in my school district and we'd like to do some audits. Well, what we'll do is we'll ask them for all the utility information for those facilities, and then we'll benchmark those, and I'll talk about this a little more in depth here in just a moment, and we'll sort of prioritize where should we start looking, which buildings should we look at first, which buildings are performing very well and which buildings aren't performing quite so well, so we can sort of focus our efforts on those buildings that require the most help. So coming out of these the results from our studies, there's low cost and no cost operational and maintenance adjustments, such as scheduling changes that can help you save money. There's short-term and low-cost energy efficiency retrofit recommendations, such as changing lighting and putting in occupancy sensors and things of that nature. And then we also look at long-term capital-intensive infrastructure improvements, such as new boilers or chillers or energy recovery type equipment, which gets more expensive. And you might have to take out a loan for those types of things. So where to start? When you contact CDAC, we ask you for your utility bills, and we use those utility bills to do a benchmarking. So it kind of gives us a snapshot of how your building is performing at this moment in time. And as I said, if you have a portfolio of buildings, we'll take a look at all those buildings. And this is an example of a benchmarking table for one of our past projects. You can see in this particular facility for this 2009-2010 period, they used over 2 million kilowatt hours, 217,000 therms. This is what it cost, almost close to $500,000 in utility costs. 54% of that cost was in electricity, 46% natural gas. This number in red here, this energy use intensity, is probably the most important number on this table. It tells us how much energy you are using per square foot per year. And the 58, that's not a bad number. We see anything from the lowest is probably in the low 30s, which is a very energy efficient building, to we see stuff sometimes, I'm looking at a building currently that's at 164, and that's bad. So this 58 isn't too bad. So this kind of gives us a feel, and obviously this number changes for the type of facility. Say a school that doesn't have summer school, this would be not a bad number, but a police or fire station that operates 8,760 hours a year obviously is going to have a higher number here just because that facility is running constantly. So we take those types of issues into account when we look at this number. So we get your utility bills, and we prefer to get more than just a single year of utility bills. You can see here there's about 2 years worth from January 2010 to December of 2011, and you can see there's some kind of funny stuff going on here. These are cooling degree days, so it kind of tells us what the climate is like, and you can see that the consumption kind of follows the weather patterns. But all of a sudden here it kind of goes awry and we're wondering, what happened there? So when we get these multiple years, that kind of helps illustrate anomalies. If there's something strange going on, if something went out of whack, or some piece of equipment isn't functioning properly. So we try to get all this information before we go on the site visit so we can get a basic feel for how your facility is using energy and what to look for. We might also benchmark your building compared to a lot of other buildings. This is an example. CDAC has looked at a lot of schools in the last 10 years, so we've got a database of a lot of information. So we'll maybe we've got also courthouses and libraries and things of that nature that we've looked at, and we've got these graphs that show all these different facilities and where your building falls in that graph, all these other your similar types of facilities. So this is some of the build analysis that we try to do before we go on site. We're looking at, it's amazing how much information you can really gather out of just the utility bills that you get from your utility company on a monthly basis. You can see here we have a school, and this is the cooling degree days, and we see an increase during the summer, which we would, if there's summer school and they have air conditioning, we would expect that. We do it for electricity, and we also do it for gas. Gas usually follows the heating degree days very closely, because usually it's just the boiler that's using a lot of gas. You might have some gas water heaters, but those really don't use that much gas. So there's a strong correlation between gas usage and weather. Electricity, not quite so much, just because there's so many different things in the building that use electricity that really aren't weather related. Versus on the gas side, it's very weather related. So you can see here, some of our clients we've been working with for years. So here, and this is one of the school districts. In this particular school, you can see there's a fairly good fit here. There's something funny that happened over here, and then all of a sudden things start to really go awry, both on the electrical side and on the gas side. And you're looking at this going, gosh, why am I using so much more gas than I would need to be using? You can see here where there were some building improvements made, and all of a sudden everything gets back where it should be. So the difference between what you're seeing on this side of the graph over here on the electrical side and this, that represents a lot of money right there. Not only a lot of electrical consumption, extra electrical consumption here, and a lot of extra gas consumption here, but that represents dollars that were spent unnecessarily. So we analyze your utility information, and then we go to the site. We meet with the managers on site. We really try to get the facility director of facilities or the maintenance folks to take us around and show us the building. They're the folks that understand how the building functions, what needs improvement, what's broken, and things of that nature. They can tell us about comfort complaints that occupants might have, things of that nature. Okay, I need to speed up a little bit here. So we look at a lot of different types of things when we're in the buildings: boilers, chillers, everything. We look at the envelope. We look at the building automation system too. That's a very important component. It tells us how things are running in the building. Sometimes we encounter, such as here, there's a little, it's hard to see on the slide, but it's a disconnected damper. So we'll find problems like this during our site visits where things are disconnected or improperly programmed. We'll find leaks and things of that nature, and all that stuff will end up in the report that we write. We'll take a thermographic camera along sometimes, which takes pictures in the infrared spectrum and shows us where there might be building problems, where there's bridges to the outside, where heat transfer is worse than it should be. In pools and ice rinks, we'll look at the heating and the filtering and pumping in pools and dehumidification. These are very energy intensive spaces. We'll look and see if we can find any variable frequency drives which cause motors to or will make motors ramp up and down. Most of the times, historically, motors were either on or off, and that's not the case these days. With variable frequency drives, we can ramp those motors up and down, and you can really achieve a lot of energy savings with these variable frequency drives. And energy recovery equipment is becoming more and more common. So after the site visit, we'll give you a short list, and that describes what we think would be a good retrofit for your building. And we'll get some feedback from you and see if that sounds good. And those are what we then analyze here at the office. We'll occasionally do energy models, which are software models where we're describing the building to a piece of software, and then we can evaluate what are called ECRMs, energy cost recovery methods. With that model will also tell us how much energy you're using for heating, lighting, cooling. So this shows you sort of where we should apply our efforts on energy savings. We'll also sometimes look at interval data, which is data from the utility company. It's taken every half hour or hour, and it tells us when things are turning on and off. And that data can get pretty messy at times. You can see here everything's turning on at about 4 or 5 in the morning, goes on during the day, and then shuts off by about 10 o'clock at night, whereas other things are shutting off earlier. It's powerful data, but it takes a while to work with. We send out, once we're done doing our analysis, we send you a report. It's got an executive summary, background information on sort of our findings while we were in the field. It shows you the benchmarking information and then our energy cost reduction measures and the economics of those that we've analyzed. There's a description of these ECRMs. And then a table showing the energy savings and the cost savings. These are some of the common ECRMs that we look at. A lot of lighting, efficient lighting, bi-level lighting, LEDs, occupancy controls. We look at it, and these are much more larger capital expenditures, HVAC, efficient boilers, chillers, and things of that nature. Scheduling of equipment, that's a low cost or no cost, and so is modifying temperature set points. And the report will also have a listing of ECRMs, all the energy savings, and the economics, how much natural gas, how many kilowatt hours you're saving, and things of that nature. Tables showing the capital cost, our estimated capital cost of these improvements, internal rate of return, the net present value, and simple paybacks. We'll also review ECRM bids from vendors. We've done that for clients. And there, as I mentioned before, there are standard prescriptive incentives and also custom incentives. So the top 10 energy strategies are lighting, plug loads such as computers. Computers are oftentimes left on all night. They really don't need to be. We look at ventilation, reduction of ventilation and heat recovery, condensing boilers for energy efficiency, VFDs, as I mentioned. We look at your building automation system and see if things can be scheduled differently. We look at the envelope and sometimes recommend air sealing, additional insulation if you're putting on a new roof, and sometimes for certain projects, windows too. But most envelope, other than air sealing, most envelope improvements are very expensive, and so we don't recommend those too often. At least they can't be justified from a cost saving standpoint, energy saving standpoint. This is an example of where we photographed this roof to wall junction, and this was in the report, and later this shows how the contractor sealed it with foam. These are just some large boilers. Let me skip over some things here. This is a smaller project where there was an existing boiler still working, but this was a church and they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. You can see them taking out that boiler and replacing it with this very little itty-bitty condensing boiler. And for this church, it's about a $2,000 per year savings. It's a long payback period, but then this church is going to be around a long time, and they did it for more than just the energy savings. They did it because they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. Sometimes we will recommend a hybrid boiler system where you only remove one boiler out of a bank of, say, 4 boilers and put a high efficiency boiler so it will run more often than the other older and inefficient boilers. It's a much cheaper way than tearing all your boilers out and replacing them. We'll oftentimes recommend ventilation energy recovery. Multi-level switching for new light fixtures, particularly in gymnasiums where you might have a 3 or 6 fixture lamp where you can only turn on 1, 2, or all 3, depending on what the venue is and the lighting needs. We recommend a lot of exterior LED lighting. And so what we do is we try to identify where you can save energy and how much it's going to cost you and how much of an incentive you can get. So there's low cost, no cost improvements, no capital required, such as scheduling, things of that nature in your BAS system, low cost improvements for lighting, and then other ECRMs that are capital intensive. And that is what Todd's going to talk to you about, how to finance some of these larger projects.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So, Robert, as he mentioned, talked a lot about...
Tom,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you click the Takeover as Presenter button?
I did.
Okay. All right, just making sure.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you advanced your slide or not.
Yep. So, Robert spent some time talking about what you would look for in an energy assessment in your building, and some of the energy efficiency measures that work in a lot of places, and some of the data analysis. And so we find that a lot of places, especially counties and municipalities, or anyone in the public sector, a lot of people are capital constrained, and so there are a lot of energy savings measures that are cost effective, but there's just not money in the budget right now or next year. There's always things coming up, and so we see a lot of cases where people they'll say, we can invest in a project if it'll pay for itself in a year or 2 years, and that's great, but that leaves a lot of savings and operational improvements on the table. There's a lot more cost-effective measures, and so the idea here is that we can look at energy savings as a revenue stream that you can borrow against. And I'm sure many of you have heard about things like energy service contracts. Many of you work with a bank to do loans. Many of you are probably familiar with going out on the bond market to pay for big projects. And I guess the argument here, and we're seeing more and more of this, is that you can treat your energy savings projects in a similar way, and so it helps to alleviate some of the constraints with tight budgets. And what I hope to show you is that there are a lot of cases where you can improve you can install these projects and you can improve your cash flow. So one thing to stress is that just like a lot of the measures that Robert was talking about, especially when we're looking at financing, if we are relying on those savings, then we need to look at cost-effective projects. And so what I argue here is that there's a range of projects that will pay for themselves in 3 to 7 years, and sometimes even longer. And people aren't implementing those because they're expensive. But these are attractive projects from a financial standpoint. And then there's another set of projects where where we're addressing deferred maintenance. And so that has its own, addressing deferred maintenance has its own value. And in some of these cases, the energy efficiency savings are not going to pay for the project, but they can help. And if there is some interest in, figuring out a capital plan to address these deferred maintenance projects, energy savings can be an important value stream to help pay for and justify these kinds of projects. And so what I'd like to do is just present some example scenarios and show how cash flow analysis could work, assuming some financing kinds of scenarios. Just to give you a chance to see what it would look like if you were to proceed with something like this, and then I'd just spend a little bit of time talking about some of the financing sources that are currently available. So I'm going to talk about 4 different scenarios and try to keep it simple here. And so we've got 2 buildings, a 50,000 square foot building and a 500,000 square foot building. And then we'll talk about 2 different kind of repayment terms. One is a shorter 5-year, and so this would be, we think about shorter life types of measures. And then one that's a longer repayment term, where we think about longer life measures, equipment that will last a long time. So things like boilers and chillers and big heavy equipment that has a long life. So I guess one point to make there is obviously you don't want to be taking out a loan or taking out borrowing for a long period of time on something that's not going to last a long time. And then when I talk about the conditions here, so the baseline condition and the improved condition, what I mean here is, so we have $1.50 per square foot per year. So this is what we can commonly encounter this in the field. Many of you probably have buildings that are performing and that cost approximately this level. And then just for running the scenario, we'll talk about a hypothetical improved condition where we do some energy improvements that are realistic, achievable in many cases, to bring it down from $1.50 a square foot per year to $1.25 per square foot per year. So I'm not talking about some really amazing energy savings project. And then we make some assumptions about soft costs and we include some calculations about the incentives. So in our 50,000 square foot building, if our baseline is $1.50 per square foot per year, then we have a $75,000 per year energy costs. And so if we take our savings scenario, that gives us a certain amount of savings. And so what I'm trying to show on here is that level of savings, $12,500 per year, is worth up to a maximum project cost of about $60,000. So if you have a 20% down payment, a project that costs about $60,000 will realize an approximate break-even on cash flow. So when you consider your loan payment and energy savings. So I guess the way to interpret this is if you have this size building and you're talking about some shorter life measures, and you're saving $12,500 per year, you're in a good financial position on a loan for a project that costs up to about $62,000. Obviously, if it costs less, then you're in a better position, and that would be attractive also. If you have a more expensive project than $60,000, $62,000, then that's when it starts to become a little bit more marginal, and you have to have other reasons to justify the economics. So this is a similar kind of slide. And the point here is similar. It's the same size building, same energy saving scenario, but now we're saying we're going to stretch out the repayment term because we have equipment that has a longer life. And so it's just a demonstration of how the longer life measures, if you have a longer repayment term, you can afford a more expensive project. So in this case, you're getting close to break even, around $90,000 for for a project that saves $12,500 per year. Again, if it's less expensive than that and you realize the same level of savings, these are going to be very attractive projects. Another thing to point out on this slide, and I didn't explain on the previous slide, we have two sides of the table. So on the left side, we're talking about what are the cash flows in that first year that you're implementing, and then the right side is that recurrent annual. And so on that left side, we're trying to account for all the costs that you would incur in that first year. And so in the red is negative, and in the black is positive. So in this example, if you account for the incentives, you come out positive in that year, and then on an annual basis, your energy savings are paying for that loan payment, and that's what we see on the right side there. So I've just got a couple more examples here. Again, this is just shifting to a larger building. Some of you have smaller buildings, some of you have very larger buildings. So in this case, it's a similar type of scenario, which is scaled up to a much larger building. And again, we see here in this case a very large building for shorter life measures and a shorter repayment term. You can afford up to a project of $700,000, and it looks like it's approximately cash flow even. And then this is, I don't think I need to belabor this one. But anyways, it's it's the large building. It's repayment over 10 years, and in this case, since it's a longer repayment term, you can afford a more expensive project, and it's still breaking even on your cash flows. So where is this money? And so lots of you do business with banks, and I'm seeing more and more banks that are willing to entertain these types of transactions. They do want to know, well, what's the source of information? How are you coming up with these savings? What's the assurance? And then, depending on, there's also revolving loans and specialized kinds of funds. So maybe some of your regional planning commissions or economic development commissions have special loans. I know that locally here where I live in Champaign County, I know that the Economic Development Corporation has floated 0% interest loans to the county for different kinds of projects. US EPA and USDA Rural Development have special financing programs. So these are special cases, but some of these may apply to you. And many of you are familiar with going out to the bond market for very large projects. Maybe you're not familiar with doing it for energy savings projects. but this is this is something that can be done. And then another thing that's becoming more and more common is the third party. So we have energy performance contracts, we have ESCOs, energy savings companies, and these other. So we have a third party. Sometimes it's an engineering firm in combination with some financing group. And so somebody else is absorbing the performance risk and arranging the financing. I'm seeing a question. What are your thoughts on performance contracting when attempting to pay for these types of projects? So, performance contracting has been it's an industry that's been in development for the last 10 or 15 years or so. It's become more common in the last 5 to 10 years. There's examples of good experiences with ESCOs and some bad experiences. And some of the what we've learned from some of the bad experiences is that it's really important to pay attention to the details of the contract. How do you, if these contracts are based on the level of savings, then it's really important to define between all the parties, how are you going to measure and verify the savings, because that's really what everything is based on. You have to be able to account for what happens when the conditions change. Maybe you add square footage to a building, or if you change the operation of that building so it's operating more frequently than it had before. And of course, it's we introduce some level of conservatism when we think about we need to ensure the technical performance of the equipment. Or whatever the installed measures are, we need to plan some contingency around whether or not that is going to perform to the level that was anticipated or calculated. And then another thing that has come up in cases is a lot of deals have gone bad or sunk because of just the financial instability of some of the parties involved. So these can become complicated deals between a host site that owns the building and operates it and wants to install the measures and have a better performing building. We have another player, which is which would be the engineering firm or the construction contractor who would be doing the installation. And then we have a financial player. And so one of the things that we've learned is that we need to look more carefully at the financial solvency of everybody involved. So I hope that addresses the question. There's good experiences and bad experiences, and I think the takeaway is that we don't want to discourage that market. I think it's a real place for it, and we've just learned that we need to exhibit a higher level of due diligence in order to make sure that everything goes well, or at least to minimize our risk. I'm having a hard time advancing to the next slide right now.
I'll advance it for you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm starting to wrap up here. I think for the just thinking about financing and how to pay for things, I think what I'd like y'all to go away with is that these big projects are more affordable than you might think, and so it's a good opportunity to consult with your business office and your financial officers, and then just a prompt to remind you all to think about the resources that are available to you. technical resources like CDAC and all the information available and services like what Robert described, and financial resources through the utility programs, through Illinois Energy Now, through the federal government. I might point you all to a resource. It's a federal site. I'm forgetting it. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was hoping it would come to me. I'll send a note to Zach, and we can follow up with everyone on that. There's a federal resource that describes financial opportunities around energy efficiency.
Todd, we had a question from Kathy Brown. She's wondering what the timeline is that a unit of government should consider for the audit report and implementation of recommendations. So just how long does this take?
Well, so an assessment can, depending on the level of detail, that can be a month to 2 or 4 months. I think the real constraint here for a government agency is to think about their budgeting cycles, the budget planning cycle. We find that a lot of units of government aren't prepared to do anything if it involves capital until it's been budgeted, and then it goes in the next planning cycle. So I think it's really important to start thinking about things for 6 months, 12 months in advance, because you get an assessment, and usually, especially if these are higher cost measures, you may want to do some investment grade analysis. You may want to do some due diligence around that. You may want to get contractors involved. You're going to have to get bids. For units of government that need to incorporate their budgeting cycles, 6 to 12 months, I think is one guideline that I might put out there. That is our last slide. We're ready to take any questions from anyone or any comments on whatever Robert talked about with measures and process, or with what I was talking about with financing.
So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them right into the chat box, and we'll field them.
Oh, and I just remember the name of that federal resource. It's not federal, but it's a federal overview. It's called Desire, DSIRE. I don't remember if it's a .org, but if you Google DSIRE, it's a nationwide compendium of resources and programs that are available.
Any questions for either Todd or Robert? Okay, well, we have a poll question. Nancy, did you want to put that up? And we just asked for your feedback about your learning experience today, and if you learned anything, and whether or not this program increased your knowledge around strategies for building energy savings. You can click directly on your screen. We appreciate that feedback. And I'd also remind everybody that the recording of today's webinar will be made available on the University of Illinois Extension Local Government Education website. It'll probably be posted within 2 to 3 business days. And I hope everyone will be able to join us for next month's webinar, which is entitled Decaying Infrastructure, Water Systems, and Countywide Solutions. We do have one more question from the field. And the question is, are you able to respond fairly quickly to requests for audits?
I guess short answer is yes. get we have to do the request. You can go to cdac.org, and there's a button prominent on the page that says request assistance or request an assessment, and we respond to that usually within a day or so, and just depending on availability of the facility and the person doing the assessment, we can get the process going pretty soon. So we're trying to we have our program year goes through the end of May this year, and so sooner you get to us, the more likely it is that we can quickly turn around a request for an assessment, and that's no cost.
Excellent. And I believe Nancy has pasted the link that would lead folks to that application there in the chat box. And then there's also contact information for both Todd and Robert if you have any follow-up questions that pop up as you're thinking about this. I'm sure they'd be happy to try to help you out. And then finally, I mentioned the local government education website. The URL for that has appeared in the chat box, and you'll find an archive of all the past webinars that we have conducted available there. And as I mentioned, today's webinar will be posted within the next 2 or 3 business days. Any last minute questions for Todd or Robert? Well, seeing none, I'd like to really thank Todd and Robert for the wonderful information they provided today, and I hope our participants out there will be able to join us next month for our next webinar. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.